But definitely want to talk about Indiana football first before we get to Indiana basketball. I've been wrapping up the show with Indiana basketball the last few weeks because of them being on the bubble for the NCAA tournament. So that's definitely been an interesting discussion. Also talking about Mike Woodson not returning for Indiana next season. He's going to be retiring per se at the end of this season instead of getting fired. And also the ongoing coaching search for Indiana basketball. We'll talk about a little bit about all that kind of stuff at the end of the show. But the first thing we got to talk about is the Indiana football projected spring depth chart. This is really interesting because when you talk about next season for Indiana football, a lot of people are intrigued. Something that really wasn't the case this past year. Outside of Indiana fans, no one was really excited about Indiana football. No one thought that Curt Cignetti was going to have this rapid turnaround for the Hoosiers, having them make the college football playoff teams that were in the national championship game. I would have never thought that. I had them going 7-5, as I mentioned tons of times. Never would have thought they would have done that well. But now, with the great season they just had, now you have expectations for next season. And we're still a long ways away from next season in college football. We're like 60 days away right now from Indiana football spring game. We'll definitely talk about the spring game and what that entails as we get closer to that. But right now, there is a projected depth chart being, put online by people that really follow Indiana football. And I'm intrigued to see what they have. So let's definitely take a look at this real quick. They have at quarterback Fernando Mendoza, then Grant Wilson, and then Alberto Mendoza as the depth chart at quarterback. That's not a shock. Because Tyler Cherry unfortunately suffered an injury at the end of the season this past year, he's not going to be on the depth chart for 2025. He's still on the team, though. He's not left the team. Some people were concerned about that. They were like, oh, does that mean Tyler Cherry, he's no longer with the program? Yes, he is. He's going to be like on the staff or something like that. I don't really know exactly how they're making that cut and dry. I think it says right there he will serve as a student coach. That's what it says right there. So, yeah, he's not going to be a part of the team on the field next season, but he's going to still be a part of the program, and hopefully he'll be back, a part of, the team next season in 2026, and he doesn't transfer. But with Curtis Rourke being out of the program, going off to the NFL, they needed to get another starting quarterback. And even if Tyler Cherry did not get hurt, he was still young. He's a guy that you're not really expecting to go out there and just immediately be Indiana's starting quarterback. That's just not the case. Yeah, I mean, there was the potential for that, but since he got hurt, that really eliminated it. No one's really thinking Alberto Mendoza is going to be that guy either. And then you had, obviously, Taven Jackson. He decided to, unfortunately, transfer. And since he did, that didn't really leave Indiana with any experience. So Fernando Mendoza, enter him from Cal. And obviously, he probably transferred to Indiana, not only for the reason of possibly being on a really good football team if Curt Cignetti can have back-to-back years of great football. Also, his younger brother's on the team, Alberto Mendoza. So that's really cool there. And Grant Wilson, probably a little surprised to see that name for some people that haven't really kept up with Indiana football that much during the offseason. Curt Cignetti added him from Old Dominion to kind of be the backup since Tyler Cherry is not available. So you definitely want to have depth. So that's good to have there. If something unfortunately would happen to Fernando Mendoza, hopefully that's not the case. But nothing surprising here. I'm not shocked to see this, being the depth chart, projected depth chart rather, for Indiana football at the quarterback position. I think Fernando Mendoza is clearly the QB1. I don't really think there's going to be any, quarterback battle of any kind. I think he's going to win the job. It's just going to end up being how successful that he is in the offense next season, whether he can replicate or somehow do better than Curtis Rourke next season. Then at running back, you got Roman Hemby, Kalen Black, and Lee Beebe Jr. Now, this is not really shocking either. Indiana did lose their top two running backs this past season, Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton, and they lost Elijah Green to the transfer portal. So I had to bring some guys in. Roman Hemby is a very familiar face. Played at Maryland the past few years, has lit up Indiana in previous games. He's got talent. He's a guy that I think with a better offensive line and better talent around him, he can have success. He could end up being a guy that has a shot at the NFL, maybe. His stats have trailed downward, unfortunately, in the last few seasons. of college football. He was better earlier on. Kind of like if Indiana fans remember Stevie Scott's trajectory at Indiana, how he started out very well, having a 1,000-yard season as a freshman, and then he never replicated that success. Roman Hemby, similar track record, started out his college career very well and has gone downhill. But I think that's more due to Maryland declining as a team as well, especially their offensive line. Not much you can do as a running back when you don't have a great offensive line. So Indiana definitely going to have a better offensive line. I think he's going to be the projected starting running back for sure next season. Interestingly enough, they have Kalen Black at number 2. I think probably because he was with the program this past season and he's had, a year under his belt of being under Curt Cignetti and did show flashes in the limited time he got. That's why they have it number 2. But I would not be surprised if Lee Beebe Jr. takes the number 2 spot at running back. Very talented guy out of UAB. I know it's a small school, but Curt Cignetti lives off guys coming, from small programs. He's done a great job with those type of players. So I think the battle for the top running back spot, there is no battle. It's going to be Roman Hemby, but the other 2 guys, Kalen Black, Lee Beebe Jr., definitely going to be fighting for the second spot on the running back depth chart. Wide receiver, you got Elijah Surratt and E.J. Williams. Shocking E.J. Williams came back. Still crazy that he entered the portal but then came back. Omar Cooper and Charlie Becker, and then Mekhi Jackson and Tyler Morris. Even though on paper, this wide receiver room doesn't look as deep as last year's, still a lot of talent. And so big. Cannot stress how important it is that Elijah Surratt came back. If he doesn't come back with Indiana losing Miles Price, Keyshawn Williams, and Miles Cross, I think that might have been a little bit too tough for Indiana's wide receiver room. Even with all these portal additions. Yeah, I know Indiana's just coming off a season with tons of portal additions, but it's hard to do it 2 years in a row. Look at Florida State. After having a great year, then they had a really bad year. So I think having that continuity at wide receiver number 1 with Elijah Surratt is huge. I think that he's definitely going to be the leader that this receiving room needs. Omar Cooper, hopefully he can have a breakout year. I've been waiting for him to break out. He's never had a breakout season, not even this past year, but he showed flashes. If he could become a consistent wide receiver number 2, that would be massive. Massive for Indiana because you need to have 2 consistently great receivers, I feel like, to be a good college football team. You kind of had that last season for Indiana with Miles Price, Keyshawn Williams, and Miles Cross. It was like wide receiver by committee. You usually hear running back by committee, but in this case, it was like wide receiver by committee. All 3 of those guys had their big games, but there was no wide receiver 2 that was a consistent number 2 option. If Cooper could become that would be big. I like Mekhi Jackson and Tyler Morris. Crazy they got Mekhi Jackson above Tyler Morris, but probably because Mekhi Jackson had a lot of success at App State, whereas Tyler Morris lost time at Michigan, like lost playing time. He started out kind of like other guys I mentioned, like Roman Hemby. Pretty good start to his Michigan career, but then it kind of trailed off longer he was there. So probably going to have to earn his way back. Kind of like E.J. Williams. He's never been able to do that. Had a really solid year at Clemson, but then has never really done anything since. So we'll see. I like Indiana's wide receiver room. Not as deep as last year's, but still has a lot of talent. Some young guys like Charlie Becker. I think it's pretty solid. Tight end, you got Holden Stage, James Bamba, and Riley Nowakowski. Holden Stage transfer from Tennessee. I think that's a massive pickup. I think he's a guy with a lot of talent. Even if he doesn't work out, then you got 2 other options in James Bamba, who's been with the program for years, and Riley Nowakowski coming over from Wisconsin. Knows Bob Bostad already. I really like this tight end group. It's not great in the pass game, but that's not something that Curt Cignetti necessarily does all the time. When you see a lot of coaches, some of them really emphasize the tight ends and they get them the ball all the time. But you don't see that as much with Indiana because of Curt Cignetti's style of play. You look back at his time at James Madison and other programs, he doesn't utilize the tight ends all the time. I think that all 3 of these guys are really solid blocking tight ends. And if they can contribute a little bit in the passing game, kind of like Zach Horton had this past year for Indiana, then I think the tight end room should be fine. Offensive line. Yes, losing Mike Kadick and Trey Wettig is tough. Losing 2 offensive linemen is always tough. But you got Carter Smith back, Drew Evans, and also you got other guys like Bray Lynch back. Then you got Khalil Benson. This is ironic. You do not see this hardly ever. Khalil Benson, who was at Indiana under Tom Allen, left and went to Colorado. Now he's back. He's coming back to Indiana football. and he's probably going to be a starter. That's crazy. That is big. So you kind of have some chemistry. You know, it's a completely new coaching staff. Then you also got Zim Mikowski coming over from Ohio State. This is so huge. I cannot stress how big of a deal this is for Indiana football to get an offensive lineman from Ohio State. I know Ohio State fans are like, well, he didn't play much. He's a guy that's raw. He needs a lot more development. That's Curt Cignetti's alley. Curt Cignetti has done a great job with development already in just 1 year at Indiana. I love this pickup. You do not turn down a guy from Ohio State, and I think he is definitely going to be one of the key pieces to Indiana's offensive line next season. And then you also see Pat Coogan coming over from Notre Dame. Look at Indiana. They're not there yet. I've talked with several people online, and I agree with those people that it's going to take a little bit of time for Indiana to really compete with the big boys for big-time recruits. It's going to take more time as a good program. You just can't have this 1 year and then it all falls apart. Like this year, they have a terrible season and expect that, those players to come even with money. Indiana's up in their NIL game. But it will be tough in that regard. But I think if Indiana has a few more good seasons in football with Curt Cignetti, you're going to be seeing more of these type of additions. I like the offensive line. I think Bob Bostad's an excellent offensive line coach. The offensive line has gotten better year over year under his watch. And I think with the additions Indiana's made, the offensive line has the potential to be better than last season. Then you look at defense, Mikael Kamara, just like Elijah Surratt. This is why I think Indiana is going to avoid having one of those massive letdown years after this one good season, right? When you look at a lot of programs, they have a lightning in a bottle year and they can't replicate it. Indiana has brought back key returners like Elijah Surratt, like Mikael Kamara. They didn't bring these guys back, I'd be more concerned. I am a little concerned anyway with the schedule, and we'll talk about that a lot more when we get closer to the season. But still, I think that a big-time collapse next season is not going to happen with these type of returners. Mikael Kamara, definitely a guy, that probably should have gone off to the NFL. He was probably Indiana's best draft, hopeful off this past year's team, even better than Rourke, some of the other players that were out of eligibility. Mikael Kamara probably would have been a top 3 round pick, but he's coming back. He's got unfinished business, maybe wanting to improve his stock even more. Don't really know how he can because he had a great season this past year. But I hope he has another great year. Hopefully, the one thing that does concern me is that he is a little, undersized. So maybe teams will figure out how to scheme him better. If they do that, that can, make his production go down a little bit. But I do like Mikael Kamara returning for Indiana. I think that's going to be huge because Indiana's losing C.J. West, James Carpenter, Linnell Carr, Jacob Mangum-Farrar. All those guys were very key to the defense last year. I think Tadarius Collins is a very young guy that has a lot of potential still. Mario Landino's getting a lot better. Indiana's defensive line, I'm not going to lie, though. I think this is probably the weakest position for Indiana going into next season. I'm a little concerned with it. There is, probably, another piece or two that you would like to get. Maybe they can shore that up in spring football. We'll see. Hosea Wheeler, solid transfer addition from Western Kentucky. I would like to see another piece or two here, but still, Mikael Kamara coming back makes that position not too much of a weakness. Then linebackers, you lose Jalen Walker, but you get Aiden Fisher back. Same thing. That's another massive addition for Indiana to get back. Then you got Elijah Hardy and Caden Turner with a lot of upside. Isaiah Jones. I wish Jalen Walker could have been able to come back too. He was excellent, but can't get them all back. I think the linebacker room's looking pretty good as long as one of those other guys steps up next to Aiden Fisher. Then defensive backs. D'Angelo Pons is back. I was concerned maybe he'd transfer. Maybe some other programs would try to poach him away. Again, Indiana up in their NIL game. That is massive to get a guy like D'Angelo Pons back. But then look at this corner and safety room. You got Amari Farrell back. You got Lewis Moore, just like Khalil Benson. Lewis Moore was at Indiana a couple years ago. Transfers to Ole Miss. He's back. It's crazy how that happened. 2 guys came back. Then you got Ryland Gandy and Amarian Knighton in the transfer portal. I think those are both really solid additions. Indiana did lose a couple guys at the portal with all of these portal additions to the corner room. But I think Indiana's corner and safety room is deep. And I think with D'Angelo Pons leading the way, it could definitely be a strength of the defense. And then special teams, Nico Radicic, he's back. And then Mitch McCarthy. It is tough to lose James Evans. James Evans was the punter for Indiana for the last 5 seasons. He's gone, but Mitch McCarthy coming over from UCF. A lot of people are high on him. So I think Indiana's special teams room should be fine. But when you look at that, though, when you look at Indiana football's projected spring depth chart, it looks pretty good. I mean, yeah, it's not perfect, but no teams is right now. Sometimes guys might come out of the blue, like Indiana's defensive line. Looks a little weak right now. Might end up being one of the strengths of the team if some guys pan out. You never know. But I really like Indiana's team looking forward for next season. I think it is definitely a team with some high returning talent, but also a lot of young guys with potential and also some key transfer additions that I think that's the Cignetti recipe to hopefully have another good year. Then you got Indiana football top players 2024. I just want to touch on this really, really quickly. Pro Football Focus named the top 101 players of the season, and they had 3 Indiana players. When would you have ever seen that in the past, right? Like having 3 of the top 101 players in college football at Indiana. They had Curtis Rourke at 41, Mikael Kamara at 59, who's coming back, and D'Angelo Pons at 73. So you've got 2 of those 3 guys back for Indiana. That's huge. If they could even somehow improve, especially I think Pons could improve even more, but that's big for Indiana. Definitely showing that the Hoosiers